Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is with a heavy heart and a deep sense of responsibility that I move the following motion this afternoon. Whereas the Premier, the Honorable W. McKeever Bush, OBE, JP, has been arrested and released on bail, and investigations are continuing involving alleged cases of serious misconduct. And whereas the Honorable W. McKeever Bush has refused to step down as Premier and a Minister of the Cabinet and allow the investigation to continue without any real or perceived appearance of a conflict. Now be it therefore resolved that the Legislative Assembly does declare a lack of confidence in the government.
Is there a seconder for this motion?
Madam Speaker, I beg
Member
to
from
second the
Northside.
motion. Madam Speaker, I beg to second the motion.
The question is, be it now therefore resolved that the Legislative Assembly does declare a lack of confidence in the government. The motion is open for debate. Does the Honourable Mover wish to speak thereto? Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the gravity of this occasion is not lost on those of us who have initiated this serious motion asking this House to resolve that it has a lack of confidence in the government. It is not a matter that is lost either, Madam Speaker, on the broader community, evidenced by the large number of people who are in attendance today in the gallery, and no doubt the thousands of people who are following the proceedings in this House this afternoon on television and by radio. Madam Speaker, I am deeply saddened that we have come to this point. Madam Speaker, as you outlined when you addressed the House and those in the gallery a few moments ago, this is a process which was initiated by me on behalf of members of the opposition on Friday. We waited, Madam Speaker, until Friday because we wished to give the governing party and the Premier the opportunity to carefully consider their circumstances, to carefully consider the welfare of this country, and to decide how best to deal with the situation with which they and the country are faced. That is, of having the sitting Premier of this country being the subject of arrest on allegations of the commission of serious offenses, having been detained over the course of 2 days with a break at night, and having subsequently been released on bail to return to the police station on the 5th of February. Madam Speaker, this is not a court of law. None of us in here are presuming the guilt or otherwise of Mr. Bush, the Premier. That is not our function. That is the function of the court of law. So, Madam Speaker, whether Mr. Bush is guilty of the offenses which are alleged, he's not even been charged yet, is neither here nor there, and ought not really to be the subject of any detailed discussion on the floor of this House for reasons which you have outlined. The issue for this House today and the gravamen of this motion is whether or not it is appropriate for the Premier, the Honorable William McKeever Bush, to continue in office as Premier or a Minister of the Cabinet while he is the subject of those investigations, while he is on bail, while he is faced with the possibility of being charged with grave criminal offenses. That is what this House is here to consider today. Madam Speaker, when the opposition issued our initial statement following Mr. Bush's arrest on Tuesday of last week, we were careful not to call for his resignation. We were careful not to make any assumptions about his guilt or otherwise in connection with this matter. Some have criticized us, and me in particular, for having not been more strident in our approach and not calling immediately for Mr. Bush's resignation. As I outlined just a moment ago, the reason for that, Madam Speaker, is that in this system of government in which we operate, what is generally termed the Westminster style of government, there are conventions, there are protocols that are generally followed which underpin the written constitution which we have. The constitution of these islands is remarkably similar to constitutions of most Commonwealth countries. And that is because they have a common genesis. And they are built on a common premise. There are many procedures, there are many protocols that underpin these constitutions and which are necessary and required for the proper operation of these constitutions. And one of those, Madam Speaker, that is so relevant to what is transpiring and has transpired over the course of the past week in particular, is that when any member of the government finds themselves in a situation where what they have done or have alleged to have done will adversely impact the reputation of their party, the reputation of the government, the reputation of the House, the reputation of the country which they represent. The convention is, the protocol is, that they stand aside. Whether those allegations being made are true or not true is not relevant. They stand aside to allow the investigations to proceed. They stand aside so that the government can get on with the business of the country without being distracted by the personal turmoil that is part of whoever the unfortunate member is of their lives. They stand aside in a case such as this, where the person accused is the Premier of the country, holding the highest elected office in the country. They stand aside to avoid any perception that their continuing in office may have an intimidating effect on those who are investigating the allegations that are being made. They stand aside because they they want to ensure that the rule of law is followed and that there can be no question that there has been interference or the possibility of interference in the administration of justice. And so, Madam Speaker, that is where we are. But, Madam Speaker, if all of those very powerful reasons are insufficient for the Premier to stand aside, there is an even more powerful one in our estimation. And that is, Madam Speaker, the damage that has been done and the damage that is continuing to be done to the image and reputation of the government of the Cayman Islands and the Cayman Islands and the people of the Cayman Islands as a result of being forced to continue with a Premier who is the subject of these investigations, the subject of these allegations, and who continues to have these serious matters hanging over him, going on at least in this instance until the 5th of February next year. Madam Speaker, anyone in this community and many in the international community who pay attention to Cayman are shocked at what appears to be a serious deterioration in the standard of governance of these islands, something for which we were once renowned, something that was once beyond any question. Madam Speaker, we have been struggling in this country with this issue about clouds of suspicion over the head of the Premier since at least April of last year. Madam Speaker, do you know what it is like as a Caymanian, as a proud Caymanian, to walk through immigration in Miami, to be asked by the immigration officer dealing with you, what do you do in Cayman? To say I am the leader of the opposition and to have the response, so what's happening with your Premier? I understand he's the subject of criminal investigations. What kind of country is that? That, Madam Speaker, is the reality that we have been living in for these past 18 months. I, Madam Speaker, have brought 2 previous lack of confidence motions to this House with the full knowledge that they would not succeed unless members of the governing party supported, some of them supported those motions. But I brought those motions, Madam Speaker, because A, I felt, and my colleagues in the opposition felt, that it was our duty not only to say what we thought about a Premier continuing in office in these circumstances, but so that those who are part of the government, in the cabinet and on the backbench, would have the opportunity to say what they thought and to explain to this country why it is that they continued to support the Premier in the face of these serious allegations. The first motion failed, Madam Speaker. The second motion never saw the light of day and was debated outside in National Heroes Park. Madam Speaker, we felt, I certainly had felt, that this approach was something of a pointless exercise, and had determined that we would leave those sorts of issues to play out, and there is an election coming in May of next year, and sooner or later the voters of this country would decide whether or not they would continue with the current administration or whether or not they wish to see a change. But, Madam Speaker, the events of last Tuesday have moved this issue right back to center court, where none of us can ignore the reality that is facing us. Madam Speaker, members on the other side, some members on the other side, themselves have come to the view that they can no longer be part of an administration led by a premier who has been arrested and is on bail in relation to the commission, the alleged commission of serious offenses. 5 of them, Madam Speaker, have appended their signatures to the written requisition which was presented to you this morning, calling for this special session to deal with this issue. Madam Speaker, I wish to commend the patriots who in that committee room late last night have made one of the most difficult decisions I know that they have ever had to make in their political careers. 11 members of a 15-member House have concluded that they cannot, in good conscience, continue to support a government led by a premier in the circumstances which I have just described. Madam Speaker, I cannot say how absolutely disappointed I am that the premier has brought us to this point. And I'm not speaking, Madam Speaker, about the reality of the investigations and all that that involves. I mean, Madam Speaker, the reality that faced with all of this, the premier will still cling like death to a dead man's jacket to the office of premier, ignoring all of the voices of concern and alarm across these islands and across the world, and brought home to him by the reality that 5 members of his own government, including 2 ministers, have said, Mr. Premier, you need to resign. 2 ministers and the Deputy Premier, correction, Madam Speaker, including 2 ministers and the Deputy Premier, his right-hand person, have said to him, Mr. Premier, we are not saying you are guilty. We don't know. We are saying that your continuing in office is doing immense reputational damage to this country that we all love, and which you, over your long career, have said, and we believe, you love. Madam Speaker, this is not about persecuting the Premier. As I said, this is not about whether he's guilty or not. This is about recognizing that him continuing in office in the present circumstances has placed and will continue to place the Cayman Islands in a position that it will be impossible for any administration led by him in those circumstances to move forward, to have any credibility, to do any of the necessary things that must be done between now and when the House is dissolved in on March 26th, and the elections are held on May 22nd. There are some 5 months between now and then, Madam Speaker. 5 months when the government has to operate, when the country has to run, when people's needs, people's concerns have to continue to be addressed. The country doesn't stop, people's lives don't stop because something has happened to one of us. And we have to realize, Madam Speaker, that we are elected as servants, not rulers. None of us are entitled to the offices that we hold. We hold them at the leisure, at the pleasure of those who have elected us on the presumption that we would represent their best interest and the best interest of the country. And when we reach a point, any of us, Madam Speaker, where we believe that our personal survival is more important than that of the party, of that of the government, or of that of the country that we were elected to serve, then, Madam Speaker, there is time for deep soul searching. Madam Speaker, we have to get back to a place where we can again be proud of the Cayman Islands. Proud to say, I'm from Cayman. Whether we were born here, whether we have become Caymanian by virtue of getting Caymanian status, whether we are residents, whether we are people who invest in Cayman. We have to get this country back to that place. In all my years, Madam Speaker, and I'm not just speaking of the years I've been down here, I have never known there to be such a low ebb of confidence, of pride in this beloved place. Madam Speaker, I want this country to be able to go back to the days when I was a youngster, when I was so proud to be Caymanian, so proud to say I was from this place, and would spend endless time talking the ears off of anyone who would listen to me from somewhere else about what a great place I came from. I want my children to be able to say with the same confidence when my son is at university in the UK, listen, I am proud to come from Cayman. That is the greatest place on earth. Madam Speaker, we need to appreciate on this occasion, this solemn occasion, that Cayman is about much more than the natural resources that we have and the wonderful people which are always spoken about. The natural resources have been here since the beginning of time. The beautiful 7 Mile Beach, our lovely waters, all of those things, Madam Speaker, the wonderful weather. But all those things and all our beautiful people do not the country make alone. Cayman was special, and I still believe we can return to those days. Cayman was special, considered by people to be special because of the image we had, the reputation we had for honesty, for integrity, particularly in government, for stability, for good governance, for predictability, where things got done, and year upon year, decade upon decade, those who went before us, who sat in these seats and stood in my place, built upon the foundations that previous generations had started. Where have we gone wrong, Madam Speaker? Particularly over the course of the last 3 years, when almost every month we could rely on there being some major article, some major headline about something disastrous that had happened in Cayman, some issue affecting the governance of this place. Madam Speaker, we have to get this country past that point. And how the Premier and those who support him continuing in office can possibly believe that we can run this country for the next 5 months under the present cloud. The headlines in the Compass yesterday, I believe, or today, I don't know, the days roll into each other now. Government in limbo. Today is 1 week since the arrest of the Premier. Ask the members of the government how much work has got done since then. Madam Speaker, we have to get past this point. The Premier ought to have resigned. He will not resign, and therefore, this House today must resolve that there is no confidence in a government continuing to be led by the Premier, the Honorable McKeever Bush. Madam Speaker, you were presented this morning with a letter signed by myself as the Leader of the Opposition, by Mr. Moses Kokernel, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, by the Honorable Kurt Tibbetts, by Mr. Anthony Eden, by Mr. Ezard Miller, Mr. Arden McLean, and by the Deputy Premier, the Honorable Juliana O'Connor Connolly, the Honorable Ralston Anglin, the Minister of Education, the Honorable Mark Scotland, the Minister for Health, the Deputy Speaker of this House, the Honorable Klein Glidden, and Mr. Dwayne Seymour, MLA. Asking you, Madam Speaker, to summon this meeting of the Legislative Assembly for the purpose of debating this lack of confidence motion. Madam Speaker, those 11 signatures represent also the resolve of all 11 members to vote in favor of this lack of confidence motion, which I have just moved and which has been seconded by the elected member from Northside. I have endeavored, Madam Speaker, to keep the debate about the issue that is at hand, and that is, Madam Speaker, the appropriateness or otherwise of the Honorable Premier, Mr. McKeever Bush, continuing in office in circumstances where he has been arrested by the Royal Cayman Islands Police on suspicion of theft in connection with financial irregularities relating to the misuse of a government credit card, breach of trust, abuse of office, and conflict of interest, contrary to sections 13, 19, and 17 of the Anti-Corruption Law 2008, respectively, in connection with the alleged importation of explosive substances without valid permits on or before February 2012. Madam Speaker, it is our view that Mr. Bush cannot and ought not to be allowed to continue as Premier under the weight of those circumstances.
I would appreciate if you would refer to him by his title.
I apologize, Madam Speaker. And so, Madam Speaker, that is the case for the motion that is before the House. And I ask, Madam Speaker, finally, that Mr. Bush reconsider his position, that he offer to the governor his resignation as Premier, that we do not, as a House, have to proceed to this vote, and all that that entails. Madam Speaker, if the Premier had resigned earlier, there would have been no need for any drama, for any controversy, for any public spectacle such as this. They could have changed the leadership of the United Democratic Party and the premiership seamlessly, and the business of the country could have gone on. But even at this late stage, Madam Speaker, it is possible for the Honorable Premier to do the honorable thing and to resign before forcing this House to proceed to what will be a historic but very sad vote. And so, Madam Speaker, I beg again for those who continue to support the Premier in his office to think long and hard about what I have said, to think about their duty to this country first, and everything and everyone else after. None of us were elected to further the careers, to preserve the political careers of those with whom we are associated. We bond together, we bind together with the common purpose of serving the country. But we also have a duty, each of us, to act appropriately to constrain misconduct of any other members of the House, and to take the appropriate action when necessary. This, Madam Speaker, is one of those occasions when all of us are required to vote our conscience. All of us are required to be able to look at all of the people in this country whom we represent and say, I did what I believed was right. I did what I thought was in the best interest of the country, not what is in the best interest of myself, my party, or my leader. This is one of those defining moments, Madam Speaker, and all of us should be gravely conscious of the consequences of what we do this evening. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak?